Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Joyce Bock. I organise this event. I run a hobby thing called Salubrious Events, and I just love organising events touching on subjects on the outer edge. So anything to do with the paranormal, parapsychology, or just trying to find out the truth of what's going on, no matter how crazy it is. So I'm going to introduce Eric. Eric is, he grew up on Long Island, New York, which is the home of Montauk Project. Anyone heard of Montauk? Yeah? And he was also assessed for the Stargate program, which is a remote viewing program. So as a kid, he was assessed for that. And he's had a series of events in his life which led him to work in Antarctica. And while he was there for 1 year, he discovered a few interesting things, which I'm sure he'll talk about. So can I just have an indication as to how many people know about Eric and his work, like know quite a lot about it, like follow him? Okay. How many only found out about him after they booked the event? Oh, cool. Great. All right, well, I think you're in for a treat, and yeah, please enjoy and ask as many questions as you want. There's no dumb question. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Eric. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me clearly? Fantastic. Joy kind of stole my first opening question with who's coming here and why. So I'm very happy that the folks that are familiar with my information came here, and I'm really happy about the boldness of people that this is new information for, that your minds are open to this stuff, because I do believe what I'm going to present here is going to boggle a lot of minds, but it is what it is. Come on in. So, no worries. My intro. Perfect. So basically, just to get it started, for some familiarity with the continent of Antarctica. It is larger than the US by 1.5 times and is mostly covered in ice, averaging 1.6 kilometers thick. It is the highest, driest, coldest, and windiest continent on the planet. What we used to say in the program is it's a harsh effing continent. It just is what it is. It's a very challenging environment for the human body to be in. I don't know if there was a slide on it or not, so I'll just throw it in here. It's when they say driest, so at the South Pole Station where I was at for a year, it is literally 0% humidity. You can't imagine how taxing that is on you. Your skin gets like tissue paper. You pretty much can't breathe. It takes you a few days to get acclimated to do anything. Everything is taxing. I'm in the trades, so doing the manual labor and stuff, you know, they said if we tested out our oxygen levels, that, you know, in the US standard, we would qualify to be on oxygen tanks 24 hours a day. But that was more or less the environment that you show up to. The day that I landed in the plane, it was minus 50 degrees, and you open up the door on the plane to exit, and it is like a smack in the face. I can tell by this room that most of you are not familiar with cold weather, so it would be a very challenging environment for Aussies. We only had one guy there from Tasmania, and he was a really nice guy. He was our machinist. It says close to no humidity. That means continent-wide. The coldest temperature there that they're showing is minus 128.56 Fahrenheit. The coldest temperature that I experienced myself personally there was minus 103.4 degrees. So it can get quite cold. And the wind speeds can get extremely high. Typically that's on the coast. Where I was at in the South Pole was more or less in this vicinity, and we didn't see wind speeds nearly that high. The Antarctic Treaty, which is as valuable as a piece of toilet paper, if most people aren't aware. The Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 nations, becoming effective in 1961, and currently has been signed by over 48 countries. The treaty stipulates that the continent can only be used for science, not for mining or military. Hence why I said it's worth toilet paper, because they do everything they want because no one's checking. Over 40 countries have stations operating during summer, and about 30 of those stations operate year-round. During the austral summer, approximately 4,000 researchers and support staff occupy Antarctica. During the austral winter, that population drops down to about 1,000. The South Pole Station proper, for the season that I was there, which was 2010 till 2011, the 2011 being the winter side of it, we only had 49 people at the facility, so sparsely populated. And then here you can see, these are the three main US stations, McMurdo, which we basically would come in through Christchurch, New Zealand, and then occupy the South Pole Station. And then Palmer Station would actually be staffed, and logistics supply came in through South America. This gives you the lay of the land for all kinds of facilities that are all over the continent. And there's a lot of activity going on. And again, nobody's checking on this stuff. The Antarctic Treaty basically tolerates that every nation that's in the treaty has the opportunity to go check to make sure everybody's doing what they say that they're doing at their facilities. No one's checking on each other. So it's kind of like this handshake, you know, see no evil, speak no evil, whatever you're doing is good, whatever we're doing is good, right? Several nations have claims on parts of Antarctica, but the other nations don't acknowledge ownership of any part of Antarctica. Aside from research stations, there are automatic weather stations that collect data also, and then there's other nefarious things going on. This is, you can see where the Palmer Station is rather close to South America, so logistically it's easier for them to work off the South American side, whereas the other side of the continent is more easily accessed from New Zealand. As a matter of fact, I'll go back on this one. So there was an old statement that they used to say. They would say that once you go south of 60 degrees, there's no law. Once you go south of 70 degrees, there's no hope. And once you go south of 80 degrees, there's no God. And then we would also say the South Pole Station wasn't quite hell, but you could see it from there. This is actually my flight in a C-130 headed from the McMurdo station down to South Pole. The flight from Christchurch to McMurdo is about 5.5 hours, and then the flight from McMurdo to South Pole Station in the slow-moving Herc, depending on weather, could have been, you know, anywhere between 6 and 8 hours. These are the C-17s that operate from Christchurch over to McMurdo. They're actually amazing planes. The C-17s and the Hercs are very powerful workhorses. This is the runway at McMurdo Station, and it's called the Ross Ice Shelf because this is technically sea ice. So these planes are landing on a groomed ice runway that takes a lot of maintenance. Let's see. The Ross Ice Shelf and the frozen sea ice provides a flat runway early in the season. Tests are done regularly to check the thickness of the ice. The ice runway and support buildings are deconstructed and moved when the sea ice becomes too soft or thin. And that gets unnerving when you're doing operations like this and you can see big, massive cracks in there saying, oh, we can get one more day out of this, one more flight. That's the Pegasus runway, C-17. Again, I love these planes. That's a friend of mine who took a bunch of these photos for this slideshow. She did 6 seasons in McMurdo Station before I met her down for the winter season at the South Pole Station. So when it comes to disclosure, I'm very biased because I know a lot of people that are actually in the program. So I have access and rubbed elbows with folks that know a lot of stuff. And myself personally, I get very frustrated in the disclosure circles that so many people are tolerated having opinions on Antarctica, which I consider my home, that they've never visited. So it's challenging to me to listen to people speak a lot of misinformation and disinformation about Antarctica. This is McMurdo Station, which is very similar to a mining town. It has everything that you could possibly need, and we would always jokingly say it's, you know, it's like a piss-poor run college. It's kind of pandemonium. The summer population there is about 800 to 900, and the winter population is about 100 to 150 people. It's one of the bigger facilities on the continent. Scott Base, New Zealand's research station, located on the same island with McMurdo. The US and New Zealand stations often collaborate for science, cargo, and logistics. They're almost the same facilities. It's pretty much run like one organization, with the Kiwis living in one spot and the US living in another. But it's, for all practical purposes, the same logistics line. Icebreaker churning up some Ross Sea ice so that the resupply ship can get into McMurdo. Basically, there's one resupply that happens every year for the vast majority of the continent. So it's a lot of planning and a lot of logistical nightmares. Some of the really cool gear that we get to play with when you're there. So there's pros and cons to everything. On the pros list is there's really cool vehicles. Various tracked and specialty wheeled vehicles. McMurdo's Ply. Oh, I'm typoed. That guy up on the top left is a very old Tucker. I've driven that van with the tracks. That one's a lot of fun. And I believe this one down here they call a Delta. And you can actually even see, so it's been around there for a while, because when I was there it was still labeled as US Navy, but the Navy hasn't been there in quite some time. I believe they departed around 1994 from the program, officially. And you can definitely wreck out. The story with that vehicle that's on its side was they had gotten caught in whiteout conditions, and they were attempting to get back to McMurdo Station, but they couldn't see, and they went off of that ledge, and they were actually stranded out there for quite some time and were in a very precarious situation. The South Pole Traverse, down here on the left, covers about almost 800 miles, 1,200 kilometers to deliver fuel to the South Pole from McMurdo. The year that I was there was the first year that they did kind of an experimental run. And the purpose of the Traverse is to basically drag large fuel bladders across the surface of the ice, because it was deemed way more cost effective than to utilize the Hercs to fly the fuel in, take stuff out. So since then they have been using the Traverses to bring fuel in with great regularity and success. These are some facilities in McMurdo. They have a full complement fire department, military-style housing, very basic for the most part. Some of the older buildings are a little bit, less luxurious. Some of the newer stuff is really nice, and if you happen to be really high up in the chain of command, you can actually get some sweet stuff to stay in. Miscellaneous support facilities all the time. We do have, medical facilities technically, but when you sign up for the program, they basically have you, sign a waiver that says, I am aware that if I get hurt or injured, there's really no services that can fix everything. So everybody just is, aware. Be very careful. Don't get hurt, which is challenging because I did mention to you the low oxygen levels and the low humidity being taxing on the body. You injure very easily. You have to be very careful because your skin does get like tissue paper, and you can tear yourself open pretty wildly, pretty quickly, and you don't heal fast, so it can keep continuing. I have certain scars on my body from stuff that, you just can't stop. I have calluses on my fingers just because every time you go to lace up your boots, you would rip your hands open. So it just never gets better. There are recreational facilities. It is a wet continent. So there was a lot of partying after shift. There were bars, there were speakeasies, there was all kinds of shenanigans going on. Back to that, it's a harsh effing continent thing. We basically just did what we had to do to keep smiles on our faces. And they did have some wind farms. I know there's some people in here, right? I agree. Yes, let's get rid of that junk. What a waste of our tax dollars. All McMurdo waste is removed from the continent, including human waste and recycling. Everything is important. That's McMurdo. At the South Pole Station, although they do take out the waste products from, the waste stream similar to stuff like this, the difference is they don't get rid of the human waste at the South Pole Station. What they do have is what we call an outfall. So basically, the way that they produce the water is what they call a rod well, named after the inventor, Rodriguez. So it's a Rodriguez well. And what it basically is it's an upside down, like water tower. You know, we normally think of putting the water up and stuff like that, but what they do in Antarctica, because the ice is so pure, we basically use a drill, a steam drill, to go down and basically make a tunnel, a tube that would go down, and then they change the direction of the sprayer so that it makes a big liquid bulb underneath the ice about 500 feet down, and they manufacture about 500,000 gallons of liquefied water down in the ice, and we have boiler systems that we use with heat exchangers to keep that temperature so that it's liquid as we remove all of the water to consume it. When that hole now is deliquefied and just a void, we then switch, make a new rod well, and then the vacant space we call an outfall, and we run the waistline over to it and start to fill it up with 500,000 gallons, or 500,000 gallons of human waste. So we called it the poopsicle. And here's just some of the jobs that, you know, basic stuff from dishwashing stations to, here we have the Mac Ops operator, who's referred to as the voice of Antarctica. And basically from this position, they do what they call flight following. So just once the planes get into the air, they have to track them. When they're moving across the continent, everybody has to check in. Where are you at? What are you doing? And then additionally, the remote field camps are regulated to, depending on how many people and how remote they are, they have timed check-ins so that if they miss the check-in, we could send out a team to find out what the heck is going on, where are they, why is their radio silence, and these things happen for all kinds of different reasons. They do have rescue teams at the ready where they can just, you know, hit an emergency button and get folks out there. Things can go wrong quickly. We used to say that, you know, the vast majority of our days were very boring, very benign, broken up by moments of sheer terror, because things would go wrong. This is what some of the berthing compartments look like. You know, sometimes you had a room where you had to bunk with someone. Sometimes you had a room that, you know, all of this stuff here, people put this in there to, you know, decorate and try to make it nice. Some sites around McMurdo, wildlife. Skua. Has anybody heard of a skua? The bird? These are really tough animals. They're not afraid of humans. Nothing in Antarctica has become acclimatized, so to say, to human activity. So the skua birds were very bold. If you were walking from one building to another and they determined that you had food of any sort, you're just a target. They would come in and swoop at you and try to distract you while other ones would try to get your plate from you. And then additionally, we had, in the Antarctic program, you know, we're, you know, try to recycle and stuff like that, we had rooms all over the place that we called skua, since the scavenger birds. So skua for us was, you know, gear, things that, you know, if it's on continent, it's a very valuable resource. So when people were ending their contract and heading home, like everybody would be looking at each other like, you're not leaving with that, are you? You know, like that's good. So people would donate it to the skua room, and it was just take whatever you need, give whatever you want. And I made a lot, they call it skua scores. When you go into skua and you find something really useful, oh, I got a skua score. They do have bike rides, they do have skiing, they do have recreational stuff. I know you guys probably can't believe that background with someone with no sleeves on, but that shows how you can get really used to the temperatures. The human body is very amazing. Happy Camper School. Any persons leaving the immediate vicinity of the station must attend Happy Camper School, where they will learn skills of survival and camping in the extreme cold in case there is a storm or emergency that prevents their return to a camp or station. They also told us that this was in case, you know, if your plane goes down, that you can survive until you get rescued. To date, there's not been one person ever rescued from a crashed plane in Antarctica. So I avoided Happy Camper School because I was like, listen, this is pointless. and it is pretty interesting, the science behind it still, because it does actually function a bit. It's just they're never going to get a rescue to you in time, but you can burrow under the ice and follow the techniques that they have, and you'll be warmer, but it's really relative. That's a happy camper trench. So basically what they do is they dig down, and that's what they call an Akio sled. So they just put that over the top of the trench and then throw snow over it, and you actually can get noticeably warmer. Mount Erebus, one of the most active volcanoes out there, and it has what they call Erebus crystals that come out of it, very peculiar stones. And there's actually been some science that just came out recently where they're saying that there's a fantastic amount of gold dust that is spewing out in the gases. So the Antarctic Treaty's actually almost expired. And I think everybody should pay a lot of attention to what happens when it does, because I think there's going to be a mad dash for resources. Tourism and resources, I think, are going to explode over there. There's a lot of what we call boondoggles. So there are opportunities to get off your job and go have some fun and see what's going on, which over in McMurdo, there's a heck of a lot more to see than there was at South Pole Station. Ice caves, the crystals, a lot of the stuff that you see in nature down there is really the only place in the world that you can witness it. So it's very lucky to have that privilege. The pressure ridges are formed when the sea ice pushes up against the land or an ice shelf during tidal changes and causes the ice to fracture and split and push upwards to release the pressure. Where these pressure ridges are extremely active, extremely dangerous. You can go there every single day consistently, and every day you show up, it'll look different because they're in that much motion. You travel in groups because there could be fissures anywhere, there could be cavities underneath. It can look solid, but God only knows, how far you can drop. There you go. This flag used to be vertical until the whole sheet of ice pushed upward and curled. And that could happen in a day. It could be vertical one day, and then you come back the next day and you realize that, the whole trail is inverted. Over in the McMurdo on the coast, there is a decent amount of wildlife to come across. There is nothing alive at the South Pole Station or anywhere near it. Scott's Hut, which to this day looks exactly like they left it. The temperatures and the lack of humidity in Antarctica is the greatest preservative ever. This is a penguin that's been sitting there since Scott's team left, and it's in the exact same condition, just sitting there. Emperor penguins, they'll walk right up to you because they're not afraid of you. There's been some scientists, which this is a great chuckle, that have decided that one of the best things they can do to save the polar bears would be to transplant some to Antarctica in their infinite wisdom. And I am just like, go for it, because I want to see the PETA people lose their minds when the polar bears just start decimating the penguin populations. On the shore in Antarctica, every animal gets on the ice because it means safety. That's all they know. So it would completely change the dynamic if these scientists in their, again, infinite wisdom applied predators to a zone where there's no predators. They're very curious animals. Seals as well. They're all over the place. They're massive, massive colonies of both the penguins and the seals, millions at a time in so many locations. Ta-da! We actually had an issue with the icebreaker for the season that I was there because we were contracted to Russian icebreakers, and right in the middle of the season, they got themselves a better contract and left. So that was one of the logistical nightmares that we had to deal with. And the big joke for us, since I was employed by Raytheon Polar Services, which is a subsidiary of a military industrial contractor formerly known as Raytheon, but now is RTX. So we joked around and said, well, why don't they just fire a bunch of their missiles into the ice and break it up? They have plenty of those. Open waters allow the animals to swim near McMurdo, so again, they're very keen on coming up and checking out, you know, what's all this noise? What are the people doing here? Yeah, they're all over the place. A lot of people in McMurdo get to do a lot of boondoggles to go interact with the animals. I shouldn't say interact, observe. Interactions verboten. Fish hut number 9 is one of the many portable units moved around the sea ice to give scientists or support crew a place to work outside of the elements. We basically just call them like warm-up huts. So if you're out and about doing stuff, then you just have a place to warm up. This vehicle right here, piston bully, one of my favorite vehicles in the world. I got to operate them down at the South Pole Station, and we actually used them as our fire engines, our firefighting gear. So when the alarms went off and stuff happened outside of the facility, we would load up in our bunker gear, hop in a piston bully, and move towards the problem. This crew was collecting fish to study their blood, which acts like an antifreeze. The animals down there are so different from stuff that we come across in other places. The temperatures that they're functioning in is just, you know, kind of beyond understanding that they can even survive there. Boondoggle. To help a seal scientist, the seal was tracked by radio signal. So they do a lot of animal tracking to see where stuff goes. Each seal had to be weighed, a blood sample taken, and a transmitter removed by trimming off the fur to which the transmitter was glued. They frown upon stapling. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, they're plenty warm. Holding the seal down so that the blood sample can be taken. You can see here that they throw them in the scales, they weigh them, tag them, track them, and just keep an eye on stuff. Weather balloons. They have a lot of issues with these things. They're very challenging to get up intact. Flying to the South Pole in an LC-130. I was very fortunate. Going from McMurdo Station to South Pole, I was able to garner a seat in the cockpit, which was like one of the coolest things ever. The views going from McMurdo Station to Antarctica are almost beyond words. Flying across the Transantarctic Mountains, observing the glaciers, you can see from the angle that you're at, it actually looks like the snow is, the glaciers are flowing. You can really get a feel for how they move. Ta-da! The South Pole Station. Amundsen Scott, South Pole Station. Aerial maps of the station and its environs. Outside of the station is just flat and white for hundreds of miles. No birds, no animals, no plants, no life. It is flat, 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 and white. Many times outside it was very challenging to traverse from one building to another because I would say it was like operating inside of a ping pong ball. Everything oftentimes was the exact same color. The sky, the ground, there was no horizon. You can pick your foot up to walk and completely lose perspective of where the damn ground is. So you'd have to be very, you know, like, where am I going? And you would be snapping your ankles all the time because lots of times the ground surface would change and you couldn't tell. So lots of times you would just be walking and you would just completely fall over because you just misjudged something and it wasn't where you expected your foot to be. This here is the front end of the facility. This area here is what we would call grid north. Since we were at the South Pole and everything was north of us, for directions they went to a grid map. The front of the station pointed to what they called grid north. Over here is where they would call the ceremonial pole with the flags of the people from the treaty. This right here is the actual bottom of the Earth. So this is 90 degrees south. That is the point for which our round Earth rotates. This is the back end. So this would be what we called grid south. And this is the arches or the tunnels. This stuff goes down into the ice. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's below what you're looking at here. There's tunnels, there's generators, there's 10 years worth of food is supplied under there. There's a fuel arch which has 450,000 gallons of what we call AN8, which is Antarctic grade version of JP8, which is a military fuel. The difference being is that the AN8 won't gel up until about minus 70 degrees, and the ice tunnels are pretty much minus 60 degrees year-round. So it's just right in that nice zone. Over back here, we have what we call Jamesways. So these here were our construction Jamesways, one of which was the plumbing Jamesway, which was kind of my shop that I worked out of. Over here to the right, not in the picture, is what we would call summer camp, which was just another series of Jamesways for us to live in. So when I first got to the South Pole, we were living in former Korean War tents, which I jokingly said looks like they got shelled more than any other tents in the whole war. We actually had the National Science Foundation engineer showed up to give a seminar about the efficiency of the South Pole Station, and she posed a question to the crowd, and she goes, "Who here knows what the least efficient building we have on the whole station is?" And I raised my hand, and she goes, "You." And I said, "Jamesway 8. And she goes, "Oh, you're right." She goes, "How did you know that?" I said, "I live in it." It was very, very cold. When I first got there, you know, I was a newbie and I didn't know. And every morning I would wake up and I would put my boots on and I would go walk to the station to get my coffee and my breakfast. And just walking from, you know, basically back here to over there, by the time I got to the station, my feet were throbbing. And I was like, man, what is going on? And then finally I spoke to some people and they go, "Are you keeping your boots on the floor?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "You can't do that." They said, it's freezing temperatures down there. So it didn't dawn on me that I was putting on boots that were at, you know, probably minus 30 degrees when I was sliding them on in the morning. They said, "No, you have to tie your boots up to the top so that they don't freeze up on you." So I made the transition and it helped my feet out a bunch. Computer monitors in the galley displayed the current conditions at the South Pole, so anyone going outside knew how to prepare for the conditions. The photos were added for our entertainment. So this was a shot of girls' night out one time. They're doing their facials and stuff like that. But we referred to this as the scroll. So oftentimes before we would go outside, we would, you know, say, "Hey, did you check the scroll? What's the conditions like? What's the barometric pressure? Which way is it headed?" As you can see here, these were pretty common temperatures, and this is not that cold yet. Right here was pretty much the number that we focused on, was the physio altitude. So we were at 9,300 feet of actual elevation. The ice is very thick and tall, but they would give us this number here was the physio altitude, what it would feel like, because the air is so thin. 10.3 is not bad. Once you got up to like 11.3, it was ruthless. So we would always dress for the conditions and pay attention to what the scroll is, because it mattered. You really had to dress for the conditions and what your task was. If you were going to be walking and in constant motion, you're fine, you'll stay warm. But if you're going to go outside and do anything where now you have to stand still and, you know, be less full of motion, you start to chill very fast. Again, the ice temperature, the actual ground that you're standing on, was at about minus 60 degrees. So when you're walking, I mean, officially, your feet are off the ground 50% of the time. But the split second you get stationary and they're there, now it's just a heat sink, so it starts to suck the temperature right out of you from the feet up. This is some of the inside of the South Pole Station. They had a pretty nice gym. They had a great lounge. This lounge here was actually part of our emergency plan. If things went wrong, this was referred to as the emergency escape pod, that we could shut this section down from everything else, shed the load of the demand of things, and just focus it into this one pod. We had a basketball gym and a theater. This here, one of the points that I always get a kick out of, these cage doors, which were elevated on the back end of the gym, since there was a lot of emergency action plan stuff that we didn't really discuss until said emergency would come about, I had just always figured that, like, that was our jail if we ever needed to be, that we could, like, stuff someone up there and leave them, you know, just hang out up there, we'll send you food. This was our actual comm center. So this was the flight following for the South Pole Station, similar to what McMurdo had, but this was where McMurdo would communicate to the South Pole. The Plumber's James Way. So this was my shop. I am an illustrious member of the International Plumbers and Pipe Fitters of the South Pole Station. We actually had a greenhouse, which produced a decent amount of, freshies, is what we called it. We did a calculation one time. They grew some strawberries, which was fantastic. We had some strawberries show up, and since we have a lot of time on our hands and some really smart scientists that love doing calculations, we did the math to figure out that it cost about $60 per strawberry to produce. They had a great library. They had a lot of great books. On the opposite of this wall, so if you were standing here looking this way, there was a bookcase at the South Pole Station, glass doors and a lock. You can go ask the HR person. It was locked just so, they didn't have stuff walking around. But that bookcase was amazing. I spent a lot of time in there. There's a lot of books that only exist on this planet in that bookcase. Some of which I read copious amounts of, was they had what they referred to as the Winter Over Psychological Evaluations from 1957 to 1994. And then they just stopped putting them in the bookshelf as far as I was concerned. They didn't stop doing it. I had a lot of issues with HR when I was there, but a lot of it was me running up with the books. And our HR girl, her name was Shannon. And there was a lot of issues with Raytheon in the program. They were absolutely still doing evaluations, research, experiments on us, and I was gathering this information from the books. And she would say, I don't know why you think that Raytheon would be doing this. I said, because chapter 4 in this book says chapter 5 is coming. Chapter 1, 2, and 3 already occurred. I said, it's just happening again. This is our power plant and our cafeteria. This power plant is of important note for my overall conversation here, because one of the things that I did discover, I will get to later on, the systems that are actually operating there, this power plant is not sufficient to produce the power needed for the systems that I discovered are actually running there. There's some sort of alternative power source going on. This is information that I went to Washington, D.C. I spoke to the Senate Intelligence Committee. I spoke to Arrow. I gave them all of my information. I pointed to them on the maps where I believe the alternative power source is located. And this is part of what they said they're going to look into.
Sure.
Right. Hasn't happened yet. It's been a year. This is the inside of one of the James Way's rooms. Very austere conditions. The one that I had was this. So this right here is an exterior wall. I woke up one night because it felt like something was tickling me. I couldn't sleep, and I said, what's going on? And I woke up. It was very stormy out, and all of a sudden, as I was looking around trying to figure what happened, there was a gust of wind, and the upper edge of the curve of the tent was getting caught by the wind and peeling wide open. And when that happened and the light came and I looked, and I was covered in snow. So the tickling was the snow hitting me. And I said, what did I get into? Because this was like the first week that I was there. And I said, oh my God, I'm sleeping in a tent at the South Pole. This is not good. This here, that's me in the tie-dye. That was the room that was assigned to the head of the National Science Foundation for the entire Antarctic program. During the winter season, the wing that room was in was shut down because it wasn't occupied. Myself and a couple other people, for a morale-boosting concept, decided to turn that room into a speakeasy so that when everybody would get stressed out, we called it Tequila Sunrise was the name of the bar, and we would just kind of whisper around and say, hey, we're having a rough week. Tequila Sunrise will be open on Friday, We had a secret knock and everything. This is Robert Schwartz. This gentleman right here, one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he holds the record for the most winter over seasons at the South Pole Station at 15. He has spent probably more of his life at the South Pole Station than not at the South Pole Station. Very funny guy, German, and very helpful. He was on my fire brigade team. I went and did rounds at his building all the time. He gave seminars every single week on the science that was going on down at the South Pole. I would sit for his seminars, and he would pontificate about all the academic stuff that was going on. I would leave him alone when he was doing his seminars. When he was done, I would go to the galley. I would sit down, I would wait for him, he would come in with a big smile and he would say, "What questions do you have?" And he and I would go back and forth, and it really boiled down to, I said, "Robert," I said, "the stuff that you're teaching these people is completely wrong and you know it." And he would smile and he would say, "Yes, you're right." And I would say, "Why is this the information that you're putting out there?" He goes, "We don't have any other information. We don't know the answers to stuff." If you actually talk to, everybody says, trust the science. If you actually speak to scientists that are at the front edge of the science, they're the first ones to admit everything we know is wrong, which is why we're looking for new information. The standard model of physics is worthless, which is why they're trying to figure out other answers. That's what people, this is in the ice tunnels. This isn't even outside. This is a person who's down in the ice tunnels at minus 60 degrees. And this is the same person outside there, and I assure you she wasn't staying out there long. She wasn't a fan of the outside. Most of the people at the South Pole don't have jobs that require them to go outside, so they don't. They just stay inside. I had to go outside every single day to every single building and make sure the lights are on, the heat's running, and everything's good to go. And that's what happens when you do that. That's me. Sometimes you mess up and you don't have things covered as well as you hope, and it stings a little bit. This is actually not the cold season 2, I can recall, because I still have the goggles. The goggles became useless in the wintertime because it would get so cold. The moisture from your eyes would just fill up the inside and cause a sheet of ice, and there was really nothing that you can do. So I had to figure out a way to redo headgear without goggles. So for all practical purposes, when I was geared up, you couldn't even tell that I could see. I had about 14 pieces of headgear that I would assemble in a way so that it got successively tighter. Once you exited the building, I mean, there was nothing to look at in the distance, so you just simply needed a little slit just to kind of look down, check to see where the steps were and where the safety flags were. But other than that, there was nothing to look at. This right here, in this picture here, is what we call DA, Destination Alpha. And that was the main entry and exit to go out to do the rounds of what we call the dark sector. And then the picture on the left is the actual geographic South Pole marker. So that right there, again, is the 90-degree south position of the planet that we rotate. That's a twin otter, also a very stout plane. This is the ceremonial pole. This is a fuel line coming from what would have been the fuel arches over to the skiway, so that when the Hercs would land, they could transfer the fuel from the skiway down into the arches. And then we have someone dancing over at the geographic pole, which is very common. A lot of what they call the hero shot. A lot of people would show up and, get a boondoggle, say from McMurdo, and just be able to make it for a couple hours, so everybody would always get a shot at the marker. Antarctica is a great place to study the air and the universe. The air at the South Pole is possibly the cleanest in the world. Since 1957, NOAA's been recording data on air quality and weather by taking samples daily for ozone, carbon dioxide, other trace elements. They're paying special attention to the halocarbons which affect the ozone. That's what they do. I'm not trying to support that it actually matters. This is what I would say is cover story science. But in the topic of the air quality, there's a conversation that happens in disclosure with great regularity, which is a sham conversation. You may or may not have heard it, but everybody loves talking about there being a no-fly zone over the South Pole Station to hide the hole that was found. And that's shenanigans. These are the people that are trying to control the narrative and are trying to get you to focus on the wrong information. There is, on the maps, of which I provided to Washington, D.C., because of the atmospheric testing at a building called ARROW, the Atmospheric Research Observatory is in a quadrant of the facility, and on the flight maps, it does state that it's a no-fly zone. If there's any pilots in the room here, you know that there is oftentimes like a key on a map that gives greater specificity to the general term. So when you look at the key on the map, it states very clearly that that no-fly zone puts a limit on how low a plane can fly. There are floor heights and ceiling heights. The floor height is what's indicated as the restriction. You're not allowed to fly lower than 8,000 feet in that area. So you can fly 8,000 feet and above, which means it's not hiding anything. So if you can be 8,000 feet and above, in an area that for hundreds of miles is completely flat, you have the opportunity to see everything. So these people that are trying to pump this information in regards to the, locked up airspace that they're hiding stuff, they're feds. They're full of crap, and they're trying to keep the focus off of what's really going on. South Pole Station inhabits the land area where polar night lasts the longest. The sun goes down in March and does not rise again until September. During this time, the telescopes have a clear view of the universe. The location of the South Pole, combined with extremely dry, thin, clear air, low temperatures, and minimal background radiation, makes it a great observatory for astronomy, astrophysics, and related disciplines. That is entirely true. Their cover story is functional. The stuff that they claim that their projects can do as their primary mission is correct. They can do that. The problem is they can also do more. In regards to the polar night and the day stuff, it is one celestial day. So in 365 days, the sun goes up and down once. So again, the flat earthers can shove it, because I was there and I saw it. Basically, what winds up happening for December 21st, which is the summer solstice, the sun is just moving up in a tight circle over your head. From that point, it then starts to go down over, every successive day. It gets lower, lower, and lower until it eventually drops below the horizon. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the green flash, but it's extended at the South Pole. So we were able to get pictures of it. I did see the green flash. It was really cool. It happens. So these are the buildings that I would have to go to every single day. So I'm very intimately familiar with every inch of them. The South Pole Telescope on the top left, the right, in darkness here. That's it over here. This is what they call the Mapo telescope, which is where Robert, the gentleman from before, spent 15 winters in this little building. At the time that I showed up for my summer season, the South Pole Telescope needed a massive overhaul. Where it rotates, there's a bearing assembly that had gone south. And normally everywhere else in the world, they would just disassemble the telescope from top all the way down to the bearing assembly and replace it. But since that takes so much time and it's not in the window that's available to do the work at the South Pole, we performed a repair on that had never been done in the history of the world. The upper unit is about 400,000 pounds, and we assembled a rig to lift it up, change the bearing out, and drop it back down again. So that was a feather in the cap for our team. The South Pole Telescope was being built to try to answer the big questions about the universe as a whole, rather than questions about the stars, galaxies, or other objects that make up the universe. In particular, we hope to answer how old is the universe, what kind of things are in the universe, how has the universe changed as it aged, can we understand or make models that describe how the universe as a whole works, and can we say anything about how the universe will look in the future? Again, they are doing all of that. I can't think of the gentleman's name now that ran the South Pole Telescope. But again, he did it for years and years and years, and I would come check on his facility every day, and one of the things that they were looking for was other solar systems. They were finding tons of them. And this was firsthand conversations from the guy running the telescope. It was almost like they couldn't count them fast enough. The absence of water vapor and generally thin atmosphere are particularly important for observing radiation at minuscule sub-millimeter wavelengths. Water vapor can absorb microwave signals that come in, producing confusing and incomplete results. On that note, the South Pole Telescope, when they first constructed it and they went to go turn it on, was dysfunctional. They were getting lots of unknown radiation that was skewing all of their results. So at first, their idea was that they were going to bring in this shielding, because they determined that the radiation was coming from underneath in the ice, which blew everybody's mind, because all these scientists should have figured this out. But then when they got the shielding delivered, there seemed to be more conversations on why there's radiation coming up from under the ice. And then they scrapped the idea of the shielding because they figured out a way through software to filter out the radiation noise, and they didn't want anybody asking questions if they put the shielding in. And I would suggest that the radiation is coming from the alternative power source under the ice, which could be a nuclear reactor that not everybody was read in on, so a lot of people didn't know it was coming from there. Produces noise from the atmosphere. Amundsen Scott has perfect access to what is known as the Southern Hole, a patch of unusually clean sky that allows for optimal viewing into very deep space and consequently to the very early universe. One of the coolest things I will ever be able to say in my life was I got to stare deep into the cosmos at the South Pole in the winter. Being at that flat level in that darkness, the only thing that you had to do was lift your head up a few degrees, and then at that point the entire Earth just drops out of view. So you can now just do panoramics and you're in space. And you know, like they're mentioned, you're looking back in time, you know. It is what it is. The balloon inflation facility. This is the elevated station over there. This is what they called the BIF, the balloon inflation facility, which was on the lower end of what they called the cryo facility, where we had a god-awful amount of chilled helium. And that's it going up in the air. The helium was chilled in bulk storage to about 4 degrees Kelvin. That's 4 degrees above absolute zero. They would then transfer it over to the telescopes, where they would drop it down to 1/4 of a degree above Kelvin, and then move that gas across what they called the focal plane of the telescope to help them with what they were trying to see off-world. Dun, 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 dun. This is the primary target of my conversation. The IceCube South Pole Neutrino Observatory. IceCube is the world's largest neutrino detector. IceCube is comprised of 5,160 digital optical modules, commonly referred to as DOMs. They are suspended along 86 strings. So each of these dots is indicative of where a cable goes down in the ice, and they have these DOMs, which you'll see momentarily, which are about the size of a basketball, and they're spaced out along, embedded in the ice. The concept being is that they are going to detect neutrinos through the tiny flashes of blue light called Cherenkov light or radiation produced when the neutrinos interact with the ice. Basically what happens is a neutrino is so small, there's trillions of them passing through us in this room right now. They're so small that they can actually move in between the nucleus and the electron shell of an atom without making contact. But at this facility, on the rare occasion that a neutrino does impact the nucleus of the water/ice molecule, an effect occurs, which is the destruction of the nucleus and the neutrino. The blue flash of light is produced, and then a muon is ejected. And that's basically the primary purpose of this neutrino lab. A dedicated team of over 300 IceCube drillers, technicians, and scientists contributed to the South Pole IceCube construction between December 2004 and December 2010. That was the year that, when I was present, was when they went from construction to operations and maintenance for both the IceCube neutrino detector and the elevated station. So it was pretty much when that facility transitioned into a new phase of life. Drilling 2,450 meters into the Antarctic glacier took on average 48 hours, while deployment of the sensors lasted about 11 hours. The sensors, called DOMs, had to be quickly installed before the ice completely froze around them. Oftentimes you will hear the science community talk about how hard it is to drill down in the ice. That's a lie. It only takes 48 hours to go down 2,450 meters. The only thing you have to do to get the ice out of your way is add water. The ice is minus 60 degrees. You add water, which is over 32 degrees, the temperature difference just instantaneously bores the ice. It's a very rapid process. So that's, again, information that they're lying about. It's very quick to get through the ice and find out what's under there. That's the coring mechanism. So fancy plumbing, copper pipes, they run hot water through that, and they can just get right down really quickly. Nothing slows that thing down, except they did hit some palm trees. The fern drill and hot water drill heads. The fern drill was used to drill through the upper layer of compacted snow or fern down to where ice actually begins, which is about 50 meters below the surface. The solid ice was melted using a straight, high-pressure stream of hot water from the specially designed enhanced hot water drill. Way down deep, where the ice is really compressed, we referred to it as Christ ice because it was, more than 2,000 years old. And there were occasions where Christ ice was brought up to some of our drinking festivities, and we put it in our cocktails, which may or may not be to the detriment of the crew, but we were having fun, and it was really interesting because it's so dense you could put a chunk of it in your drink, and it just stays there. It doesn't melt like regular ice, but you could be sitting there hanging out, having fun, and all of a sudden it would calve, it would split, and it made like this really loud, creepy noise, and oh my God, my drink is alive. These are the DOMs. So this is a digital optical module, and you can see as they're dropping it down, a lot of the communications that I have had with folks in trying to figure out what these systems really do, the topic oftentimes comes to the cabling and power. This is where I say that there's a lot of evidence that shows that there's other things going on, because this is not just communications line. There's a lot of power that is being put into this system. This is right here when you walk inside. What I said before was Destination Alpha. This is like a little display when you first walk in, and that's the gymnasium door behind it. This is a great, great view. So in the top left corner, you can see the dots as they're lined out, and this is what's going on under the ice. You can barely see all these little dots on these lines, but this is the assembly currently, as is at the South Pole Station. It is already the world's largest telescope. Just this year, they have decided they're going to make it 10 times bigger. That's already approved and already going to happen. So this device, whatever it really does, which we all need to look into, is about to get 10 times worse for us. And just like the windmills, they can't justify the cost. I don't think they can justify the cost for what this is doing right now as presented for its primary mission. So they can't justify making it 10 times bigger, again, off its primary mission. But once we have conversations about what it can do alternately, I think that justifies what they're doing. 10 minutes. You got it. Yep, we're getting towards the end. This is the inside of the IceCube laboratory. There are rows and rows and rows and rows of server towers that the processing power, again, is off the wall. I would have to go out to the IceCube lab every day to make sure that there were louvers that didn't get stuck closed, because the computational power, the amount of heat that these systems are putting off, requires the outside air temperature of South Pole Station in the winter to keep it cool. Basically, the thermostat says it's getting hot in here, and it opens up the louvers to the outside. So that's how much processing is going on there. I believe there's a quantum system there, which we're all learning requires massive cold temperatures. This is another great shot. So this is what they would call a bloom. So when an impact would actually occur, it would light off in the software so that they could indicate from what direction the neutrinos came from. And then the idea was, this is what we were told, which again goes back to what I said to Washington. They would observe where a neutrino came from and then send that information out globally so that other systems could then observe that location. IceCube telescope is a powerful tool to search for dark matter and could reveal the physical processes associated with the enigmatic origin of the highest energy particles in nature, which are neutrinos. 6 years after its completion, IceCube has isolated more than 80 high-energy cosmic neutrinos with energies between 100 I think it's Tesla volts, and I don't know the other one, from more than 1 million atmospheric neutrinos and hundreds of billions of cosmic ray muons. In my conversations with the crew since I have been there, I have come to learn that they are actually not discussing way more notifications of neutrino impacts. They're really squishing down the numbers. Here's the South Pole Traverse. They're taking their hero shot over at the pole. C-17 airdrop. This was a practice run. We actually had 2 emergency airdrops during my winter season because we had medical conditions for our crew that needed attention, and it was a very big deal for them to figure out how to get stuff to us. We also had to perform an appendectomy on one of our crew members, had appendicitis, and it was the first time an appendectomy was done at the South Pole, and it was quite the challenging task. That's me in my firefighter gear, because I was in that often. Back to that, most days were pretty boring, broken up by moments of sheer terror. Lots of times the automated system would just, usually when I sat down for lunch and was about to take a bite of my food, the alarms would go off, and it was like, here we go again. So we would gear up and go rectify whatever dilemma was going on. This is what I loved. The Aurora Australis was beyond beautiful. The South Pole has 1 night and 1 day for 6 months each. When we stay for the winter, we call it spending the night. And it is a gorgeous night. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see the Aurora Australis, but it's very interesting because you can even tell when it's coming. I called it sizzling. Something would occur. You could be walking around and all of a sudden you would just hear like this sizzling sound, and you'd be like, oh, an aurora is about to occur. And you could start looking around and see it just forming. It was very interesting because they weren't, as much as it looks like they're above you, which sometimes they are, sometimes they were right next to you. So it was, it was like angelic. I don't know what to tell you. It was very cool. This was our sunrise dinner meal. So after spending the entirety of the night, when the sun came back, it was quite the festivity. The kitchen crew really hooked us up. They made it out like there was going to be a vote, like everybody vote for what you think should be the meal that we serve. And then we sat down and found out that what they did was just make every single person what they wrote down. So it was really cool. So I had coconut shrimp and bacon wrapped sirloin. And this was the end of the season. So October of 2011, these were 2 of my crew members that were basically on the first flight out. A gentleman by the name of Glenn and Holly, who was formerly the voice of Antarctica. And there's a whole bunch of links that support a whole bunch of things that I just said. But we'll have a short break, 15 minutes. And then that's basically the overview of what's presented at Antarctica. I will get into some specifics about what's really going on down there, and then open the floor to questioning, because this is what they present. There's a lot more going on. So thank you very much for listening to that. And okay. Welcome back, everybody. What did you think of the overview so far? Cool. Now we're going to shift gears entirely. So that was the science as presented. That's what they teach the world is going on at the South Pole Station. This is now my experience. This is what I learned direct, firsthand, on site, and with dealing with the crew afterwards for years of doing research and connecting the dots, because we were absolutely negatively impacted from being in proximity to these systems because of what they also do. The IceCube neutrino detector, with the 5,160 DOMs embedded in the ice, is a very nefarious technology. I located and provided to the world documentation from For all practical purposes, call it the operator's manual. The University of Wisconsin-Madison is the academic arm that runs the ice cube neutrino detector, and in their paperwork, which I have provided on my website at deciphering.tv, I have what's called the archives section, where I have some documentation that supports the things that I'm saying. In there I have what is referenceable as the DOM document, which states very clearly that each of these DOMs has the capacity to transmit at up to 2,047 volts each, making this the world's largest phased array transmitter. It is not simply passively observing neutrino activity. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to make this device 10 times bigger. Watch as they do not increase the power production by 10 times. So again, there's some other alternative energy there. This device, as I mentioned earlier, went from the construction phase to operations and maintenance in February of 2011 was the first time they turned it on, which was precisely when the earthquakes destroyed Christchurch, New Zealand. That was us. This is an earthquake generating device. We need, as a people, to have added to our vocabulary directed energy weapons systems. That's what's going on at the South Pole Station. This is one of 3 directed energy weapons systems that I observed and worked on myself. The second one is an ELF system, which is commonly used for submarine communications around the world. And when I arrived at the facility, I was told very clearly that this system was off, defunct, and non-operational. After many months there, over the course of doing standard repair work, I was required to change out a pump, which I then had to go to a sub-panel, de-energize the pump, do lockout, tagout, standard safety protocols. In that process, there was confusion as to which circuit breakers went to what. There was things that were on that were supposed to be off. I had to get my chain of command involved, at which point the circuit breakers were identified for me, of which I learned that the ELF system was energized. It is still active. That's directed energy weapon system number 2 at the South Pole Station. Earlier, I had mentioned ARROW, the Atmospheric Research Observatory, which is presented as a clean air observation center. When I was present, walking around on the ice, what I observed regularly was a very powerful green laser shooting from the top back right-hand corner of the ARROW building way out into space. And it would be a sustained burst for minutes on end without pause, of which my research since then, I have learned that for the most part, science says what I saw is impossible because green lasers specifically require a god-awful amount of power to fire for even a fraction of a second. So I was watching them fire for minutes on end. We didn't have the power supply for that from what I was presented. What you saw, the picture, is just standard CAT generators. These things cannot provide that kind of power. So that is now 3 directed energy weapon systems that we can say exist at the South Pole Station right now. This is what I call actionable intelligence, not the stuff that people are speculating about what's going on in Antarctica. This is brass tacks reality right now. This is a level of technology that we the people are not privy to, that the wealthy elites, guess what, they don't care about us. They're monopolizing these technologies. I'm not going to begin to say that it is exclusive to the South Pole program. I'm not going to say that it's exclusive to the United States. I believe that many factions around the world have this stuff in their possession, and there are wars going on right now, and we the people are caught in the crossfire. I don't know how many people, raise your hand if you've ever heard the term Havana syndrome. Cool. Havana syndrome. So this is basically the list of symptoms for which human beings can be negatively impacted by what are directed energy weapons platforms. Way back when in warfare, it used to be that we would know the front line is over there, people are fighting, you either go to the front line or you leave the front line, but at least when people left the front line, we knew what the wounds of war were with conventional weapons, bullet holes, lost limbs, and we understood what was going on at the front line and from the weapons. Contemporarily, we don't know where the front line is. It appears to be everywhere, and these weapons don't leave the wounds that we're familiar with. But if we, the people, start paying attention to what Havana syndrome symptoms are, and we start to pay attention to the folks that we know around us, we'll start observing that we have walking wounded everywhere. It just is what it is. I did have the benefit of last year, in June, I went to Washington, D.C., to work with Dr. Stephen Greer and his most recent big disclosure project. In that visit, I was asked to go to what are called SCIFs, Secret Compartmented Information Facilities. I was told these are the most top secret rooms in the country to transfer information. I basically, testified in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Arrow. I gave them all of my information. I brought maps with me, pictures. I let them know where everything was located. They thanked me for my information. They told me it would be forwarded to Congress almost immediately and put into the National Archives. They had no gripe with anything that I said. They were very understanding and appreciative. The long and short of it was that all of us in the rooms agreed that there are absolutely rogue factions that have access to these technologies, what are called special access programs, and unacknowledged special access programs have become so secret that they've gone rogue and are operating outside of the oversight of our governments and we the people. And we need to figure out how to reel this back in. As I'm sure everybody in this room can know, our planet is screwed up and it's usually the rich people stepping on the throats of the poor. So we do need to do something about that. In that time period when I gave the testimony and I had expressed to the world the green laser beam from Arrow coming out, I still have a lot of friends in the program. They're more than happy to give me information. This was just before my birthday last year, and then on my birthday, just a few days after I gave testimony, the National Science Foundation has a website where they can put any information they want up on any given day. And on my birthday, they posted for the first time ever publicly, it was a shot of the Arrow building with the green laser coming out of it. And people started sending that to me. They were like, you're right, you're right. And I said, looks like somebody I know in the crew gave me a little birthday present by posting that and really supporting the information that I put out there. So basically, this is the switching of the gears. This is what's really going on. They're going to make this thing 10 times bigger. What we need to start finding out is what does this stuff completely do? What I'm learning about directed energy weapons systems is that they're very multifaceted. We think of conventional warfare and weapons, guns and tanks, you pull the trigger, it does one thing, it fires one kind of caliber of bullet. Directed energy weapons systems are way more complex than that. First and foremost, the system by itself can do a multitude of things. Just like we see with the ice cube neutrino detector, it can basically observe neutrinos, it can transmit, it can cause an earthquake. Through my communications with Dr. Greer and his team, and what I was saying earlier about people learning about where the direction of a neutrino is coming from, and then redirecting other forces to observe, what we're concluding is that yes, there certainly are off-world UFOs, but there's a lot more factions that just have the same technology, and that the exotic propulsion systems that these vehicles use eject neutrinos. So the South Pole Station is effectively like an air traffic control station for these exotically propelled vehicles that many factions have, so it's just observational. The other concept is that it is faster than light communications. This is quantum entangled communications. I don't know how many people in here might have heard of Gary McKinnon. He hacked NASA and found that we have an off-world space fleet that's out in the cosmos. Obviously, if we have vehicles out there, we need to be able to communicate with them. The ice cube neutrino detector is that system. It provides faster than light quantum entangled communications. So there, again, everything is multifaceted, and we're being kept in the dark about the levels of technology that should be available to everyone, as the rich people apparently are monopolizing this technology. As a side note, one of the things that I have testified publicly, I spoke on the Sean Ryan show about this. I had the benefit of working alongside another gentleman once who, when he found out that I was in the program, he fessed up that he was in the program. And he basically said that he actually did have to sign an NDA to go on what's called a cat train across the ice. He was also employed by Raytheon Polar Services, and he says, I don't care about any NDAs. He goes, we were sent out on the ice for Raytheon to find places to place missiles. So that's even just conventional warfare that breaches the treaty. There's nothing right going on down in Antarctica, and nobody's talking about it. But that's the page change. I do want to open the floor to questions. Fire away with anything.
So did you see any or observe any what you'd call ancient artifacts or ancient technology that may have been like ancient buildings or anything like that?
Absolutely not. I saw nothing ancient whatsoever. Certainly not at surface level. I have no doubts on a personal level that there has to be things below the ice. Every other continent on this planet is strewn with ancient structures, and I think if you were to remove the ice, we would find stuff there as well. What I've learned about glaciation, you can look up Operation Iceworm over in Greenland. They were doing stuff over there. We often hear people talking about global warming and how fast the glaciers retreat. What you never hear anybody talking about is how fast glaciers grow. They grow really fast. So how fast they retreat is not actually really a big deal, because if Mother Nature wants the glaciers to grow again, she'll make that happen, and it'll happen very fast, and that's way more of a detriment to us. Global freezing would be a problem for the planet. Global warming's not to the detriment of anything. Plants love carbon dioxide.
Yep.
What about with the HARP system? Is there anything like that down in Antarctica?
Absolutely. This is a HARP system. It's the first three-dimensional one. So HARP systems typically are just length and width on the surface of the planet. This is the first one that's three-dimensional. So again, it gets into the math of whatever a HARP system can do, basically now add the exponential component of having this depth to it, which makes it more targetable. Basically, in the transmit side, by firing off the DOMs in whatever pattern they need to, allows the directional control of the transmit, which can function pretty much anywhere on the planet.
So do you think that this technology can cause tsunamis?
Can it cause tsunamis?
Do I think? Yes, I do. I do think that, even though my own personal experience, I can't prove that, but I would suspect that it is in the same power bands of the function of a system like this. Again, being multifaceted, a lot of it just has to do with how you turn the dials. If it turns out that this system can't do it by itself, my belief would be that a lot of these systems are cogs in a bigger machine, so that they can use a system over here, a system over here. If you're familiar with scalar or longitudinal waves, I'm sure we've all seen the movie Ghostbusters where they say don't cross the streams. Well, scalar and longitudinal wave activity, when you cross the streams, does cause effects that we are not currently privy to. But it is what Nikola Tesla discussed was when he was discussing scalar and longitudinal waves, he got mad because people would talk about, radiating energy, and Tesla was very a stickler for terminology, and he didn't like the term radiating because it assumed a propagated loss of power, and he was actually showing the opposite, that when you cross the streams, it was like taking stuff off the Hertzian wavelength and then having it disappear from one point and show up at another point in no time, so effectively faster than light activity with no propagated loss of power and added power showing up on the far end, which kind of explains earthquake generation. Is if you can take the power from one place, have it show up where you want it in excess, that is the definition of creating an earthquake. You're adding power to it. The stuff that I discussed with the crew in depth, and I apologize, this is not my expertise, but they tried to just, they're explaining to me, they're like, you need to explain to everyone how easy this is. That where there are fault lines and stuff like that, Mother Nature already wants there to be an earthquake there. All you have to do is simply add a little bit more power to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it is exceptionally easy to make an earthquake. The challenging part is delivering the energy. This is the device that delivers the energy. That's what's going on.
Yeah, not every.
Not so if they're in the water.
Question here, Nick.
Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, look, thank you for clarifying the no-fly zone. I think most of us probably believe that the no-fly zone was all over Antarctica, but
Nah.
just to clarify, it's just below 8,000 feet, was
In a
it?
very specific location at the South Pole,
Right.
which is in the area the Atmospheric Research Observatory is.
Yeah.
So the Atmospheric Research Observatory would be in the northeast quadrant and pointing away from the facility. And yes, it just limits the flights to be above 8,000 feet, so it hides nothing.
Yeah. So that brings me on to my next, well, my real question is, did you see any evidence to support what Admiral Byrd talked about from his expeditions there in the 1950s?
No, and from my research on it, he was nowhere near the South Pole when he was making such statements. People oftentimes reference his journals and logbooks, but they're being very selective. He was very clear about his position when he made every entry, and when he discussed that he saw a hole in the ice, he gave his elevation, and if I remember correctly, he was at something around 1,900 feet, which wouldn't even put him above the ice. So he had to be at the coastline, which it would make a lot of sense that there were breaches in the ice. So we're not talking about being out in the ice field.
Yeah.
Second to that, I mean, just basic common sense. What kind of plane was he flying? So when you talk about, you know, people say, oh, he flew into a hole. Do you know how huge a hole would have to be? Because people often think like he flew into a hole, like this is his plane. Oh, there's a hole. Let me dive down. Planes don't do that. So if you want to land a plane and enter a theoretical hole in the ice field, we're talking about 9,300 feet of elevation of ice. The width of this hole that you would have to have a flight path to go down would be so freaking big, it would be observable by every satellite on the planet that's ever flown over. And I wholly do not believe that every single group on the planet could hide that. I think people are really cherry picking information and doing with it what they want, because that really controls the narrative.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
What do you do?
Shout, just shout.
Shout. Okay. Shout.
That's for the recording, but I
Hello.
need to hear you as well.
Hello. Thank you for coming along and presenting. Can you just clarify what period of time you were there again? And
Absolutely. I was present at the South Pole Station from November of 2010 until November of 2011.
Okay, so for the
366 days straight.
groovy. So my question is, recently on forthepeople.space, which is a website that I've been accessing, there's images of a military base on the top of a gigantic tree stump, which I think from the wording in the article, they're saying about 1.5 to 2 kilometres wide, and they're saying that the magnitude of actually the Earth that we live upon is actually a lot larger than the scale that we've been told it is. So my question is to you is, have you seen or do you know of that military base that apparently is positioned on top of this gigantic, enormous tree stump?
I don't, but I've seen a lot of people on the internet show pictures of what are rock formations that they're calling tree stumps because they look like a cut tree stump. And I find it laughable because I've yet to see a chainsaw that big that could cut it so straight. I think they're taking great liberties with how something looks like. I've looked at clouds in the sky that looked like they were shaped like elephants. Did I see a flying elephant? Absolutely not. I think this is internet propaganda that is distracting us.
Yeah. We shall see.
No worries.
I would say. That's for the people dot space.
Okay, hi, I'm Denise. I just have a curious question. You mentioned the first week you stayed in a tent. Did you
Mentioned what was that?
the first week you
Yes.
stayed in a tent? Did you continue to stay in a tent?
I stayed in the tent the entire summer season. So the whole
Right.
summer season, that was where my berthing compartment was. It was very austere conditions and challenging. The skiway, the C-130 Hercules planes, when they would land, they would never shut off. The pilots were terrified that their planes would not come back on, and they themselves would be stranded at the South Pole Station with us. So those planes were literally idling next to our
Okay.
tents. And I got acclimated to sleeping in that environment. And then when we switched to the winter season and I got a station cush room, I couldn't sleep because it was so quiet. I was begging them to bring the Hercs closer to the facility to idle so that I could get some sleep.
Okay, the second part of my question is, how was the temperatures maintained for daily activities, like within the lounge or living rooms?
They
etc.?
had heating systems. The power plant, basically off of the coolant system of the generators, went to heat exchangers that then transferred that heat to other glycol pump systems that then pumped that through the rest of the facility. We had some electrical stuff as backup, and then we had other backup systems that if we lost our primary systems, but effectively it was recovered heat from the generators. The
Okay.
buildings were very efficiently sealed. So we operated the temperatures at about 65 degrees in the living spaces, and they were very attentive to those numbers because of our fuel supply being limited.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, in your opinion, that technology, can that create massive holographs?
I don't know that this technology could do that, but I don't doubt that there's holographic technology that does exist. In my career as a plumber on Long Island, oddly enough, before I went to the South Pole Station, I was working all over Long Island, which is a massive military industrial complex arena. I worked at the facilities for companies like Grumman, like AIL, like TRW, and I worked in the homes of the people that owned those companies. In my travels, I don't know if anybody remembers the National Geographics way back when they first had the holograms put onto the covers. I had the benefit of working in the man's house who generated those holograms. I was in his basement looking at him making holograms right in front of me. So do these technologies exist? Absolutely. Can I associate that technology to this technology? I can't go that far. But I do believe, again, that when you take systems like this and systems like that, I do believe that they can be mated to accomplish things. At this stage of the game, as far as I'm concerned, if we can imagine it, it exists.
I'll make my way back up.
Thanks, Eric, for coming and sharing all of this with us. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Speak up, please.
Yep, sorry. Thanks for coming and sharing all your knowledge with us. That's fantastic. I just wanted to ask a question about this. If this is the HARP installations, Stephen Greer says there's 3 around the world, I think.
Oh, there's more than 3 HARP installations around the world.
I know this. They do them sort of smaller now, and they're on the back of ships out in the ocean and stuff. But he said there were 3 main ones. Are they connected?
They can absolutely interconnect. That much I do know. So this gets back to the crossing of the streams.
Sure.
So certainly this one can be directed for a certain trajectory. Another one could be directed for another trajectory.
Right.
Even just insofar as the technology of HARP being an ionospheric generator, the bubble that they can make in the ionosphere. So one can basically make the bubble so that another one can shoot to utilize that to refract the beams. And this is how we get into that where have many systems functioning so that the weapons of war are firing about us, but we can't see them.
Right. Are they all at this stage of technology, or are some of them still using the older?
This is the forefront. And I don't believe that any other ones have gone in 3 dimensions like this yet, to my knowledge. I do believe that this is the one that we really need to focus on because it's already the biggest one.
Sure.
It's already the first one to go into the 3 dimensions, and now it's about to be scaled up 10 times over.
Yeah. So how long before they do that? So if
They're working on it right now. They're already
46,000. That's
Say this again?
That's 2,400.
This is 5,160 of these already,
So
and they're going to
10 times
upscale
that.
it by 10 times.
Wow.
So just imagine 10 more of these around it. It's probably going to be in a very similar formation that more hexagons
Hexagonal.
will
Yeah.
most likely just be worked around it.
Yeah. Right. Wow. Thanks.
Hi, how you going? My name's Robin. I'm from Independent Media here in Western Australia.
We need more of that.
Gentlemen and Simon as well. You mentioned your friend that was made to sign an NDA. Have you ever been made to? Were you required to sign one before you went?
I was not.
You're not?
Correct. One of the things that I came to learn both in my travels as a plumber all over Long Island and then down in South Pole, what I've learned from my own direct first-hand experience also included when I went to testify in Washington, D.C. at the Arrow facility. The most top secret facilities we have do not have barbed wire fences on them. They do not have signs that say top secret, and the people working in them have no idea what they're doing because compartmentalization is an extremely effective tool. That's the nature of the beast. When I went to Arrow, I brought one of my crew members with me to support the information that I was giving. This is someone who I had spoken in depth about my life and my travels and about the other secret facilities that I was in. The only thing that I cannot discuss about my communications with Arrow was the names of the people investigating me and the location of the facility. But when I went to the address that they directed me to, and I walked in with my former crew member. It was a very benign location in the middle of the community. We walked in the door, and I said, let's go back outside. We walked back outside, and I said, you remember how I told you all these other facilities that I worked in that I figured out were top secret? I said, watch what happens now when we go back in and we continue through this building that just looks like a standard commercial building, law offices, dental offices, very benign stuff. It proceeded to be like the beginning of Maxwell Smart. I was greeted by the Secret Service. We were completely checked out, wanded, all kinds of checks were done on us. Blast shield doors started showing up out of nowhere, and you have to now go into this room and get locked into here, and we're going to check you out here and check you out there. Yeah, it was super secret, and no one knows that it's right there. I mean, the building next door, for all we know, could be the most secret building in all of Australia. You won't know that.
Yep.
You'll see people, going in and out of it. Missile silos and stuff all over the U.S. for years are staffed. It takes a copious amount of people to staff them, so they can't put them in the middle of nowhere because then it's not secret. But the activity would be observable, and they'd be like, oh, wow, look at all these people going into... No, they're in your communities. Yep. Everybody else is signing NDAs and is secreted up to not tell you what they're actually doing in your neighborhoods.
I was just waiting for the music. Dun, 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 dun. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just 2 other questions was the neutrino detector that you're talking about. There are 2 questions. Do you know who is responsible for building that and where the money has come from?
Technically, it's the
build that?
University of Madison, Wisconsin is in charge of that facility.
Can you say that
So,
again?
University of Wisconsin, Madison is the academic arm that I would say, is my understanding, is in charge of the funding, the coordinating. Basically, for the United States Antarctic Program, everything comes from Congress cuts a check to the National Science Foundation, and then the National Science Foundation starts to distribute the monies out to take care of things. And it's my understanding that the monies for the ice cube neutrino detector go to University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it's a god-awful amount of money, which does not make sense. We're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars. So as I mentioned, they talk about it being really hard to drill to try to justify the expense, and it's not there. This was actually very easy to build, so the cost is not justified.
Hello. Hi. So I just wanted to ask. Oh, thanks. I think my voice is loud enough without this.
Well, that's just so it goes into the recorder.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask. Obviously, there's a lot of technology out there that's weather controlled and stuff as well. Do you think that's going to coincide with stuff like this?
Yes, absolutely. I would say earthquakes or weather.
Well, obviously, obviously,
in a way,
but also other things like lightning storms,
absolutely.
weather storms. Yeah.
Yes, because this has the ability to deliver energy anywhere on the planet and off the planet. It's omnidirectional because of how this array works. If they want to fire stuff starting here and working in a direction, it can go this way. If they want to fire it that way, it can go this way. This is the concept of a phased array transmitter and being able to really precisely send out the energy with precision. So whether they want to do it in the ground and cause an earthquake, do it into the atmosphere to enhance a storm, create a storm, steer a storm. Yes, I would put this all on the table.
And just another part to just that question. Obviously, you've said that this green laser gets shot out into space.
Yes.
What's the main? I mean, are we trying to communicate with something else out there, or are we trying to disrupt and?
I believe that the green laser, along with the god-awful amount of power and the stored helium. This is new stuff that I'm researching. I don't have all the answers on, but we need to start understanding what is being referred to as chemical lasers. Seem to be a very powerful technology and on the spectrum of communications at great distance. Again, going back to Gary McKinnon's work, we have an off-world fleet. We need a way to communicate with them. This being quantum entangled way of doing it, and since we love having redundancy to things, if one system goes down, we need a secondary way to communicate with them, which I believe is through chemical lasers.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, has this technology attracted like high strangeness type of events?
I witnessed something at the South Pole, which I can only presume. One time when I was walking back from the dark sector, headed back to the elevated station, there was blowing snow. So lots of times when you're walking around, it's almost like water. So the snow is blowing across the surface. Sometimes you can't see from your knees down because it's like being in water. At other times it gets up higher. So on this particular day, the snow is probably just above my eye level. So I'm, functionally walking from one building to the other and kind of, wondering, hey, I've been walking for a while. How close am I to returning back to the elevated station? So I was trying to kind of get up to look over the blowing snow. And again, it's straight flat there. As I looked up, coming from grid north, across the entirety of the sky, really fast, I saw a massive fireball shooting over the elevated station. It was huge. It was close. I could see the flames about it. I believe in hindsight. At the time, I just thought, it's a meteor. I went inside. I spoke to everyone I knew. Nobody gave a damn with the information of what I saw, which I thought was peculiar. But in hindsight, connecting the dots, it dawned on me that the trajectory was pinned flat. It wasn't coming down. So I believe what I witnessed was something that was of controlled flight path. And at the time, I wasn't familiar with the object that I saw possibly being a UFO, but since then I've come across people that, kind of categorize, and this type of item was on the list of things that other people have determined to be UFOs, and that kind of blew my mind and solidified that, wow, I saw something important. So to the concept of your question, I do think a lot of the technologies that we are wielding on this planet are being observed, A, by anything off-world, it would be concerning to them, but B, just other factions that have this technology that do want to check on what's going on at places, that they'll do it with their greatest technology that's the hardest to observe, the hardest to do anything with. And again, these are the machinations of war going on between the factions that have these technologies.
You mentioned the Havana syndrome a little earlier, and would you elaborate on the symptoms, because you mentioned that a lot of people are being affected by that now? I'd just like to know the symptoms.
I don't know them all, and I won't go into clarity on who has what, just because I'm not going to compromise the privacy of the people, and also I do not want to let my enemy know how close they are to hitting the target. So what I would simply say to that effect is that it has to do with cognitive issues, skin issues, joint issues, eye issues, all kinds of things that, you know, you may not think are a big deal until it happens to you. You know, to realize that somebody has power over your physiology. This is, you know, again, these are the walking wounded contemporarily. There's a lot, tinnitus is another big one. That a lot of people, you know, just by all means, it's very referenceable. Go look at the list that's available and start paying attention to the people around you that are now gaining these symptoms. And we, the people, should start realizing that we're surrounded by walking wounded. If all of a sudden everybody around you had bullet holes in them, you'd be very concerned that something's going on. So now we just need to be aware of the new wounds of war.
Sorry, just aware of the time. Is it 8 o'clock? So do we want to go over? Like, does anyone have to leave early, or do you want to stay another 15, 30 minutes?
I don't have to go anywhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, we'll stay. Okay, great.
Okay, I've just got a bit of a question about your power supply. I'm very interested in that. Do you have more information on that, or is that still?
I do not.
No?
It's just we're using more than we're making.
You think there could be like a nuclear reactor underground or something?
Absolutely. I believe I targeted the location with great accuracy on maps when I spoke in the skiffs to both organizations, and they said that they would look into it. I gave them actionable intelligence on where it's probably at. And it would be in a very long tunnel that was associated with what we call Old Pole, which was the original installation created by the United States Army in 1957. And during my summer season, they claimed to have blown that facility up. And I believe that was a ruse because winter rovers, in their access and freedom when no one's around, had a history of breaking into the Old Pole during the winter season. So I think what they wanted to do was make it out like it was destroyed to hopefully keep people from meandering in there. And on that note, there was a book written by one of my coworkers from the summer season. His name is David Pablo Cohen. He wrote a book called Heller's Tale, an Antarctic novella. It's presented as fiction. I highly recommend it. It's a very good read. The main character is Andrew Heller the welder. Has nothing to do with Eric Hecker the plumber.
Cool. Was New Zealand an accident or was it directed, do you think?
I was told that it was an accident by people that were part of the startup team. They might have been lied to. I don't know. But as presented to me, I was told that it was a friendly fire incident that was completely an accident. We may find out someday that that's not true.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yes, I did have somebody sent to me. There was a WikiLeaks document that somebody found that was an email from Hillary Clinton in reference to the Cheech earthquakes. And she basically stated in this email that she was very happy with the outcome of the earthquakes and the fact that they happened on cue.
That tells a lot about her, doesn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all this technology and all that energy that's associated with that, would that be able to provide us normies out here with energy as well?
Absolutely. This is what Nikola Tesla told us way back in the day. He was attempting to try to get this information out to benefit humanity, and what seems to have occurred is it was absconded by the elite, and now it's just monopolized technology that they're reaping the benefits of, not us. And they're giving us all these spiels about global warming and all this stuff, and we need to this and we need to that, as if they don't already have the answer.
Okay.
We need more wind farms, right?
Yeah. Anyway, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Now, I'm taking a look at this design here. It looks, the description also kind of matches something I read about Nikola Tesla and his so-called death ray that he was making. And I'm wondering, would this be the final conclusion of the thing he never managed to build?
I do not think it would be the final conclusion. I think he had way more advanced stuff than this. As advanced as this is, there is more available.
And the second part of the question is, if they continued with Tesla's technology the way it was going, do you believe that he actually may have been the inspiration to the so-called space fleet we may or may not have? Based on
I don't think Tesla would have been the inspiration for the space fleet per se.
Because my research, based on something my father witnessed in Scotland in the 1960s, was high energy lift technology, which allowed objects to pick off the ground using high energy.
I think if you looked into the work of T. Townsend Brown or Otis Carr, that you would find more work done in that direction than Tesla did.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
Thanks very much for your presentation. It's great. I'm a little intrigued. Having seen just recently, supposedly 2 Navy SEALs, US, in submarines have gone underneath the Antarctic. And I'm sure you're aware of this.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying that they came into what was a docking station underneath,
Mm-hmm.
and they found that the pressures were exactly the same as if they were on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Also, too, the amount of lighting as they moved through the walls and all the rest of it, and each room was around about 9 acres, which I thought was interesting, as they progressed all the way through. But the energy that was there, you were alluding to that perhaps it may be from old technology of having a nuclear. I'm just wondering, in fact, if there's a derivation that you're talking about these neutrons and things like that. Is it not kind of a version of cold fusion instead of the current understanding of atomic energy? It just seems interesting that there could be an explosion effect using this idea, and then it called itself something else, that could be a never-ending supply because it regenerates itself as it constantly goes through that motion. But it's interesting that they had the ceilings would rise or expand depending where they were, and as they went through and as they left that particular area, the light would go out and it would go on to illuminate as they were moving forward.
I think there's organisms down there that have bioluminescence. For starters, great question, and I have a lot to say about that. I do not believe that the neutrino impacts can be utilized as a power supply. There's nothing that indicates that. But with that being said, back to submarines below the ice in Antarctica. For starters, there's a lot of statements from Hitler's U-boat captains that discuss that activity, and then more so, back to my direct first-hand experience. One of the people that reached out to me when I first went public was a gentleman by the name of John Warner IV, son of John Warner III, former Republican senator of Virginia and former Secretary of the Navy for the United States, which at one point in time, Operation Deep Freeze was under his purview. Prior to dying, John the son spoke to John the father, because John is very interested in these topics. When I went to Washington, D.C., I stayed with John at his residence in the Watergate in Washington, D.C., and we had very deep conversations about what's going on under the ice. He asked his father during his time in the Navy, as Secretary of the Navy, what's going on with Antarctica, the Navy, and submarines, and his father told him very clearly that submarine operations are occurring under the ice, using steam drills and stuff like that, so that they can access from the ocean to get to areas that are naturally exposed. Very recently, there was science released to the public that stated that we need to consider that the continent of Antarctica has active riverways like every other continent. But that would be occurring under the ice at great depth. So again, when I told you that the ice is very easy to melt, now when Mother Nature brings water up from underneath at what's considered land level below the ice, it absolutely will create caverns. And this is where the submarines are making interconnections from. When he asked his father what the purpose of submarine activity was under the ice in Antarctica, his father's response was space operations.
just going on with the theme there from submarines, we know a couple of years ago we had a bit of a shit show in Australia with submarines and that fell through, but now it's reappeared and we're going to have some new ones in God knows how many years.
We always need new submarines.
Oh, of course. And of course we've had the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defence, Richard Marles, come out last week and say that they're going to be giving $2 billion for Amazon, you know, someone that ships, you know, books and pieces of plastic we don't need, to build all these facilities, which is going to help Australia's defence, essentially spyware, all those sorts of things. Do you think those two things are related, that all of a sudden the submarine kind of topic has come back up again and that we're going to be buying them, and Amazon's getting involved with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defence, and we're spending $2 billion there?
I think the submarine concept is also something that we should pay a lot of attention to. Again, in the peculiar path that I walk, I actually did spend a period in the United States Submarine Service. You asked if I signed NDAs before in regards to Antarctica. No, I have not. Did I sign copious amounts of paperwork in the United States Submarine Service? Yes. There's a lot of stuff that I cannot discuss openly about my time in the submarine service, but there's a lot of stuff that I can. So again, back to the conversation about submarines under the ice in Antarctica, things that could power stuff that take lots of energy, like nuclear reactors. Well, if it turns out that we have the ability to drop cables from the surface all the way to the bottom, if there happens to be a river down here with a submarine and a nuclear reactor, we have a power supply. So these are the dots that we need to connect, which all make sense. And, you know, once these submarines do get submerged, nobody has any idea what they were doing. I was in the submarine service back in 1994, and one of the peculiar things, so this is not stuff that I had to sign off on because this was just scuttlebutt. This was, I guess you would just say, common knowledge in the submarine service was, and this was 1994. When we went underwater, we were at war. They were not discussing with whom or with what, but they were very clear about, you know, nobody knows what we're doing, but we're at war, was just the understanding. And certainly you can do research that ever since, from 1994 till now at the very least, that I've been paying attention, a lot of submarines from many nations come back extremely damaged. And they use the same excuse every time. Oh, they hit a mountain range under the ocean. Well, usually the damage is to the top of the submarine. So unless they're inverted, I don't know how people are believing this story. So there's a lot of nefarious activity when it comes to the submarine service. I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on in Antarctica, and we should be able to start correlating things.
Thank you. Do you think that this is connecting to the satellites and all these lovely satellites that are being putting up into low Earth orbit?
I do not, because these devices don't need the satellites. There's above and beyond that.
Okay.
These can go wherever they need to without pause. Nothing gets in their way.
That's interesting. Thank you.
As the next submariner, did you have any dealings with the sonar systems that are based in Pine Gap in Central Australia?
I did not.
Hey Eric.
Fantastic. Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very interesting speech, really enjoyed it. I've always been interested about 9/11. I read a book by Dr. Judy Woods, who was a component of, it was actually an attack by a directed energy weapon that day, which explains a lot of things, like the planes were more a magician's trick to go, oh, the plane's hit, oh, it fell down, and hide the real story, the real crime that was in plain sight. And one of the interesting things she said was the week before 9/11, a hurricane was quietly moving up the coast of the United States, and that this was the power source that this weapon may have harnessed. And it's always blown my mind.
I find Dr. Judy Woods video irrefutable to probably be the greatest explanation for what did occur on 9/11. I do not believe that the hurricane was the power source, because these devices don't need that. But in regards to that specific hurricane that you're talking about, it was up to and including the day of. So that hurricane was inbound to Manhattan. It was going that way for about a week, when all of a sudden the day before it was paused off of the coast of Manhattan. 9/11 occurred, and then that storm did something which no one else has ever seen before. It went back on its own path. So there was, I would believe, outside energies applied on that day on many spectrums.
Could it have come from here? In any
No,
way?
because this wasn't existing yet.
Yes, of course. One more question. The fires in Hawaii were also attributed to a direct energy weapon, and it was funny, people observing anything that was painted blue was unscathed.
Yeah, I think there was directed energy weapons involved. I was interviewed by a woman from Hawaii who had a lot of pictures from locals, and I saw stuff which I as a tradesman I thought some of the freakiest stuff I've ever seen. So like all these electrical lines we know have, you know, stuff strewn through the walls. I was shown pictures where it was like as if something impacted the electrical system, caused it to burn so hot that it literally melted through and made these tracks in the building, but then stopped right there. So as a tradesman, there's nothing in my brain that can account for how that can occur, but she showed me plenty of pictures of it, and what I know about technologies that exist and the way, you know, things are built, I think that opens the door for a lot of questions as to what the hell's really going on around us.
Yeah, maybe a couple more questions or three more questions.
Thank you. Just following up on that, the hurricane turning around and going back on its correct same path. We have a phenomena here in Australia. It seems to happen with all these explosions, and then we have fires going up in a straight line. Now we're not, you know, we're not silly. The fires generally don't follow a straight line. Then not long after that, we have a straight line of intense weather formations. In addition to that, we've had so many instances where particularly along the Queensland coast and all the way down New South Wales and Victoria, you see these specklings of electrical energies, you know, that's way beyond whatever. And we've, I'll put my conspiracy hat on at this point and say, well, that's where they want to have a high-speed railway go through. So to get rid of all the people in the way, they cause massive flooding, they cause massive fires, and interestingly enough, we're even having aircraft with these little nodes on them, and you can follow the line where they've actually set fire to national parks and various places. So that's a sort of an experiment on how tolerant we are as Australians, I think, and two, the fact that we're bloody determined we're going to build there again despite their best efforts. And the disgusting part about it is we're seeing our military being involved in that. Now, being an ex-military, and I'm sure there's a few others around here, it's a slap in the face of what we were standing up for.
Absolutely.
But this is what gets up our nose on this whole matter. But I'm sure, have you got any other comments in terms of what you've observed?
I would say great observations, and this is exactly what I'm getting at, and the reason that I'm here is that I think we the people need to pay more attention to these precise things that are going around. These are the indications that there are technologies being applied that we're not being told, and you've even identified the motive, which is perfectly reasonable. I couldn't argue your observations, but I would say that we need to work together to confirm these things. As we're observing them, we can't deny what we're observing, but now we need to find the guilty parties.
My question is, what would you suggest, as a man in your, having had that sort of an overview, what would you suggest, apart from absolute
Honestly,
but anyway.
honestly, I straight up challenge every veteran out there, because they're the ones that took the oath. In my country, the obligation that I took stated very clearly to protect the citizens of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So if anybody else has ever taken such an obligation, I demand you stand up and do what you swore to do. The civilians never took such an obligation, so they don't have the responsibility. So I request that all veterans get off their asses and start doing what they were trained to do. We do in Alaska. You're welcome.
All right. My question is, would this device be able to alter magnetic fields?
Oh, absolutely.
So this kind of device could literally allow the ozone layer to put like a massive layer of radiation over an area from the sun?
I don't know that the ozone layer is impacted by
Or
electromagnetic
it
fields.
could do something like create a lot.
It could certainly do something in the
Because there's a lot of
electromagnetic spectrum that's to
speculation
the
about-
detriment.
There's a lot of speculation about the people who went to Canberra in 2022, and a lot of them walked away with radiation poisoning and so forth. But
Havana syndrome symptoms.
I took a look at some of the videoing that other people took, and I couldn't help but notice that the machinery they were aiming at them were not at the right direction to actually do any damage to them, but they were getting damaged anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And also, would also be the contributor to the so-called, continuous heating the planet seems to be going under, because it seems that the planet's gone on heats and colds before, but this seems more directed to only populated zones.
I believe one of the problems for the people that find themselves staffing these facilities unbeknownst to them, because they do not realize that the systems that they are working on are weapons systems, but their enemies do. So my crew at the South Pole Station is under the understanding that we were an active weapons system. It is our belief that there were other factions working back against us. So whether it was our system and our proximity to the systems that we were operating, or a foreign element that was happy to fire back at us, we were caught in the crossfire. Which sounds like the people in Canberra were also. So even if their equipment wasn't aimed to hurt them, but someone else, I assure you that someone else is returning fire.
Thank you.
Correct.
Maybe one more question, or two more questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I've seen a couple of different pieces of research about, the radiation poisoning, the effects of radiation poisoning, fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, and about they've referenced like the Spanish flu and when Marconi invented radio waves, and how it affected the populace, and the timing of those things, and then there was the increase in like VHF waves, and then so on and so forth, and then we had the whole theatre phenomenon with this whole COVID-19 thing going on.
Yep.
And now with technology such as this, it would be fair to assume that such technology could give those effects to people, like that radiation poisoning.
Yes,
those
I
effects
couldn't agree
again.
more.
So
Great observation about the Spanish flu, and when radar first showed up on the planet in mass, all of a sudden human physiology seemed to be suffering some sort of negative impact, which makes perfect sense. It was stuff that we weren't exposed to previously, and our bodies had to overcome, adapt, adjust, but there was growing pains involved. And then, the application of vaccines back then, you can look at the numbers. People were already becoming acclimated to the new technology and on the mend statistically before the vaccines ever even showed up into the population.
And then,
so the vaccines are a scam, in case anybody hasn't figured that out. I know I didn't have to say that in here, but what the hell.
And on that note as well, with this technology, it has the capability to activate, so to speak, the aluminum particles, the barium, the strontium in the atmosphere, all of that. So that can all tie into it as well.
This could certainly transmit.
Even more so than like Pine Gap or HARP or whatever, but if we're going to this scale of this. That's very concerning.
Yes, absolutely. I would put that on the list of things we need to stress concern about. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
One more? Yep.
Also, on the list of Havana syndrome symptoms, they discuss that the victims are suffering peculiar noises, is how they like to refer to it. It's voices. They do have the technology. There was a company called LRAD that now goes by the title of Genesis, and they have devices which they call acoustic devices, which could, in a room like this, target one individual, and that person alone exclusively would hear the noise, the voice in their head. This is voice-to-skull technology as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's all over the place and commercially available. Backpack-sized devices as well.
Thank you, Eric. I've got one question. What can we do as civilians?
Share this information far and wide. Start conversations with people that you don't think are even interested in it, and start tweaking people's brains. Because this is all referenceable, whether people want to deny it or not. There's nothing they can do with the fact that these technologies exist, and I would suggest that that's the direction that you come from first. Don't speculate at people, give them facts. Start with the technology because it's wholly referenceable. They cannot discount what currently exists.
Thank you.
I do have available for anybody that's interested. I just have some stickers here, so that hopefully you'll remember this day as a little memento. And what I would ask people to do is I do have a website, so I'm not strictly limited to YouTube or Rumble. All of these factions that are very good at censoring and limiting information. My website is deciphering.tv. It's actually going to get completely renovated this weekend from what it was to something newer and better. So when you say, what can we do? I invite people to go there, take this information, and just share it. That's what needs to be done, I think.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.